This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Now we're going to consider how an individual can develop. And this is normally done through encouraging people to set up a personal development plan. This is an action plan for individuals which should help them improve their performance. And of course, if you improve your performance, you should enhance your career prospects. It will increase your skills, both skills which you need now and skills which you may need in the future. It will enhance your career development because of the skills, because of your performance. And it will, we hope, allow you to pursue your interests. So maybe you start off in the accounting department, but you get particularly interested in maybe not the ordinary accounting, but maybe in dealing with spreadsheets, or dealing with management accounting, or dealing with treasury, where you're involved with foreign currency transactions and so on. So you will have an eye on this as plotting out, really, this is where I want to go. These are the skills I need to get there. And that is part of your personal development plan. A competency framework can be of some help in this. Competency frameworks are used both in recruitment and subsequently they can be used in appraisals, and they can be used by individuals themselves. It's a way of assessing their ability across a number of different qualities. Typically what you would have is you set out the competences, things that you ought to be good at or to have some ability for. And you will set out the target performance, what you need to be able to demonstrate really to be satisfactory, and you estimate your actual performance, or indeed your manager may do that for you in the case of an appraisal. So here, for example, we have certain generic competences, general competences, fire safety, first aid and ethics, and then we have a couple of very specific competences here. How good you are at using Excel, how good you are using the accounting package. And here's the target performance. This obviously indicates that this person has got no role to play in first aid. That's presumably been taught to several other people in the office, so we don't need to learn it at all. We need very high ability in Excel, reasonable ability in the accounting package. So what we put in there is the skill description, the aims and objectives, and the competency levels, and maybe how that can be measured. And then we put in evidence of employee competence. It could be self-assessed, it could be your manager, it could be the recruiter, and the date, signed off and so on. So maybe we're absolutely fine on all of this. But a manager is just a little bit dubious maybe at how good we are at Excel. We can't do pivot tables or something, or can't draw graphs or something slightly fancier, and they reckon we're maybe pretty nearly there on the accounting package. And this will give us some insights as to where we need to make up the gap, and maybe will give us some indication of where formal training might be needed. And of course we could request formal training if we thought there was no other way in which we could plug those gaps. Hopefully later on they may, if it's urgent, they may set a kind of deadline for you improving your actual performance. And later on, when they come maybe in 3 months to review that again, we hope that you've moved towards the target performance. So it's not complicated. It is just setting out, specifying the competences, where are you now, where do you need to be, and providing some sort of mechanism for closing those gaps. Time management is also an important element of personal development. People who can't manage their time will habitually miss deadlines, which can be very serious indeed. They may find themselves having to work late into the night simply because they haven't thought about priorities and so on, and suddenly they discover something that has to be in tomorrow morning and haven't even discovered it yet. So time management tends to make people's work slightly chaotic. What people should do, maybe first of all, is to set goals which are smart. In other words, how are we, or what do we want to improve by way of our time management? Is it the paperwork? Is it being able to distinguish how urgent a task is? And there is very much a difference between importance and urgency. It is important that you submit VAT returns, but maybe the next VAT return isn't due until 3 months' time, so it's hardly urgent. What we need to make sure of is that we don't maybe jump too much to the tune of urgent tasks if they're very unimportant. So we need to consider both of these. And the goals which you want to set, they have to be specific. I'm going to crack paperwork rather than this great pile of chaos on my desk. I want to reduce this down to almost a paperless desk. You need some way of measuring it, and you're not going to achieve it maybe in a day, but maybe we can have a kind of timing so that after a month we have it well reduced. After 2 months it's going to be completely reduced. It needs to be something which is achievable. It may be impossible to get to this paperless desk. It needs to be relevant to us. It should be important, and we need it time limited. We are going to achieve this by a certain time. We need to develop skills as to prioritizing results and tasks. We need maybe to-do lists to help us with prioritizing this. Sometimes people have got 2 lists in the to-do list with things that must be done today, and then the second list is things that need to be done, at maybe within a week, within 2 weeks, at some time in the future, and so on, so that they distinguish basically the urgency of these tasks. And we have to sequence the tasks. Sometimes people have problems with time management because they don't maybe remember to ask people for information, and until people submit the information they can't actually produce the report that's been required. It's a bit like cookery. Sometimes you read a recipe, you want to make something for evening meal, and you go to the recipe and it says that you should soak this vegetable for 24 hours. So you haven't really prioritized, you haven't really sequenced the tasks very well if you're going to eat well that evening. 3 kind of definitions to be looking at here: coaching, mentoring, and counselling. Coaching, I think we've mentioned. Coaching is where you are looked after by an experienced employee. Maybe you accompany this experienced employee around as maybe they visit customers and clients. You observe what they're doing. This employee will tell you how to do the work and will check up on you. It's very much workplace learning. Mentoring is slightly different. Mentoring is more like having a good friend in the organization. So when you join organizations, you're often uncertain as to how to act. Maybe somebody isn't treating you very nicely, or you think isn't treating you very nicely. You wonder, is it just me that my boss doesn't like, or is my boss a bit nasty with everybody? And basically a mentor is a friend, a longer term employee who can give you advice. The mentor shouldn't be your boss, shouldn't be your line manager. The mentor should be someone that you can go to and speak to, really free of any fear that this is going to get back and harm your career. And then we have counsellors. Counsellors give what's called non-directional guidance. Counsellors will not tell you what to do, but if you say, look, I have a problem with a particular customer, we don't seem to be getting on, what the counsellor can say, well, what do you think should be done about that? And you say, well, maybe what I should do is I should go and see the customer and try and clear the air. And the counsellor might say, okay, do that. What happens if, however, the customer is still going to be a bit recalcitrant, if you like? So what the counsellor does is try to, I suppose, almost get to the bottom of the problems and get you to see a range of solutions yourself, and then to choose the best solution that you can see. The aim of all of these methods is to try to increase your productivity, increase your efficiency, and I would also say here, increase your well-being in many ways, your comfort within the organisation. Conflict is a fact of life, and it is certainly also a fact of business life. By conflict, I don't mean getting to the stage where you actually want to hit someone. In fact, you might want to hit them, but it's rare that you actually will hit them. Conflict means a bit of an argument, a disagreement, a bit of unhappiness, perhaps caused by the actions of one party. And it tends to be disturbing. It tends to be something which is not going to help the business achieve its aims. At best, it's a distraction. At worst, it can be downright destructive to what's happening in the business. It's important to recognise it, therefore, and important to at least have some methods by which it could perhaps be diffused or countered. The causes of conflict are listed here. They can, of course, just be personality problems, personality clashes. You simply don't like someone. It's probably happened to all of us, maybe both giving and receiving. It's not entirely rational. It's not at all rational, but it's quite difficult to overcome it. I think the first thing maybe to do is to recognise that perhaps you have been grabbed by an irrational emotion and kind of try to think to yourself, how can I get over that? This is not fair. Perhaps we should have a new start. It can come from prejudice. You don't like certain types of people. It can come from value differences. Some people find it perhaps easier to be, shall we say, relatively relaxed with the truth, whereas other people are much more strict in how they want to conduct business. A common cause is a competition for resources. It could be, for example, office space. One department needs to hire more people, another department also needs to hire people. Where are these new employees going to be put? If we hire another office, slightly down the street, who are the ones who are going to be relegated to the second office, who are going to remain perhaps in the office where the centre of attention is? Of course, it comes a lot from money, from budget conflicts. One department wants a new IT system, another department needs new delivery trucks, a third department wants an updated piece of machinery. The budget will only stretch so far. Everyone's putting in competing bids for their piece of capital expenditure. Some people are going to be left unhappy, and there can be a conflict. Ambiguous roles in authority. For example, two employees disagree over whose responsibility something was. And it could be a disagreement either to say it wasn't anything to do with me, or it could be a disagreement to say, why did you do that? That was my decision, that was my job. So these role ambiguities can cause clashes, and which can lead these people to certainly argue and dislike one another. Poor communication and information flows. Again, easy to see how it happens. Your boss comes up to you and says, "Have you finished that report?" And you say, "What report?" And it turns out that then you begin arguing perhaps about whether or not you were ever told that a certain report had to be completed by a certain time. If it's something big, try to get it in writing. Poor performance standards. The performance standards might be set too high, so that the employee is always failing and the boss is always being displeased with that employee. This will lead to a conflict. It could, of course, be the other way around, that the performance standard is perfectly okay, but the employee, for some reason or another, either laziness, perhaps not having received the proper training, perhaps not having time, but the subordinate doesn't complete the task to the performance standard wanted by the boss. And again, the possibility of conflict between them. Poor procedures. For example, a very easy one would be very, very difficult, for example, to, if you're in a lucky position of being able to claim expenses for travelling to clients or something of that, but the company makes it extremely difficult and arduous for you to claim your expenses properly. Then you know you've spent the money properly, yet maybe for some reason you haven't got the little bit of paper justifying it, the receipt, you maybe gone a tiny bit over the budget, and you're told no, you won't get anything at all. These harsh, difficult procedures can lead to conflict. And undue pressure. Always having time limits which are too difficult, performance levels which are too difficult to achieve, always perhaps being set up in a position where you're always in competition with colleagues, and the bottom 3 out of a team of 20 every month or every year, for example, the bottom 3 are dismissed from the job, and so it goes on. This continuous tension and pressure. How can conflicts be dealt with? And some of these methods are going to be more successful than others. First of all, there's avoidance. Two people have an argument, perhaps about what the budget should be or who should have done something, and they just kind of don't talk to each other. This will, to some extent, keep the peace, but you can see it's going to be short term. Both parties will have a resentment, and both parties will find it hard to ever cooperate in the future. So avoidance is not a long-term solution. Competition. Competition is where one party is determined to win and is quite happy for the other party to lose. It is definitely a win-lose. The winner will be happy. The loser will still have resentments, will feel perhaps unfairly dealt with, and after a time may decide to leave, that the decision that was made was unfair. Perhaps the person who won is rather disdainful of the other person, is almost like pointing and saying, I won that battle, I'm going to win the next. Accommodation. Accommodation is basically where you try to live with the decision. One party may give way fairly easily. That's a form of accommodation. So again, perhaps a competition for budgets, and you say, right, I really need a new computer system. but I can see you need new delivery trucks. Okay, you can have the delivery trucks. The peace seems to have been brokered, the peace seems to be there, but accommodation is not necessarily the way to get to the right decision. The person who needed the new IT system may have given way, may have been too pleasant, if you like, and perhaps the new IT system is more important than having more delivery trucks. Collaborating is where you really try to get to a win-win situation. You really get together and say, look, there's a problem here on this resource allocation. Perhaps if what we did, let's say, was IT and delivery trucks again, perhaps you could say, well, if I could get half of the IT system, half of the new computers this year, and perhaps you could get half of the trucks next year, then we do the same next year, perhaps we'll be able to keep going, rather than it being kind of win-lose both times. There's a real cooperation to try to get the best possible solution coming out of the conflict. And finally, on this initial list, there is compromising. You say, okay, I really wanted this type of IT system, this type of computer, but perhaps I could do with a cheaper one. Well, the other person says, well, perhaps I could buy a cheaper type of truck. It's close to collaborating, but the danger with compromising is I get the cheap computers, you get the cheap trucks. Perhaps neither of us will have the assets that we really need to get on with our jobs and to do them efficiently and well. But at least with compromising, they may come out later that there's a resentment, but at least for the time being, people may be able to live with it. In terms of management's way of approaching this, to some extent, the first 5 that we had here were almost kind of generic solutions, if solution is a word, to something like avoidance. The next 4 are more to do with how management can try to cope with people who are in conflict. And first is satisfying. Satisfying is essentially what managers do to try to bring about a compromise. They say, I can't give you both what you want, but if I give you each half of what you want, will that be good enough? Is it, if not perfect, is it sufficiently satisfactory for you to cope? Next, we have sequential attention. Sequential attention is something like, you can't have your trucks next year, but you can have them, I beg behind you, you can't have your trucks this year, but you can have them next year. This year, we have to think that the IT system being renewed is the priority. So, don't worry, I haven't turned you down, but I've got a priority list here, a sequential list to go down, and we will see to you in time. Side payments. You can't give people what you want, but you give them something else, almost like a bribe. You see it quite a lot in development, housing development, factory development, and so on. So now in the UK, what's quite common is if you have a developer who wants to build, let's say, a new block of flats, and the new block of flats is going to be medium height, it's going to affect the view, it's going to affect the other people living in the area and so on. None of them really want this block of apartments in the middle of them. What the developer might do is to say, right, if I can build this block of apartments, I will also build a sports centre that the whole community can use. And by the way, I'll also build a very nice new school, or a new hospital, or finance a new scanner, or something of that type. All of these are side payments, buying people off by providing something else that they may value. And finally, there's the exercise of power. To some extent, this is a little bit of management feat, but sometimes it's necessary, particularly if there's urgency. You say to two people, stop arguing, you're going to get your computer system, that's what I've decided. The trucks will see to later. No more arguing, go back and get on with it. Now that makes a decision. It gets the IT system into place first. Of course, it's going to mean that the transport manager who's not getting the trucks may go away with a seething resentment and so on, that maybe has to be smoothed over later and so on. But certainly if there's a lot of urgency, if there's a very, very clear and important, almost emergency priority, then the exercise of power may well be what's used.